Senators John McCain, Joe Lieberman, and Lindsey Graham all agree on one thing. Egypt is not just another Middle Eastern country. It is the heart and soul of the Arab world. Now, we caught up with the three U.S. senators at the 47th Annual Munich Security Conference. Senators, nice to see all of you. And on the way to come up here to talk to you, I picked up two newspapers in the lobby of the hotel. I can't read German, but I certainly recognize that picture as what's going on in Egypt. How serious is this?
Well, it's of the utmost seriousness. In modern times, we haven't seen anything quite like that, and it certainly heralds a new day, which is going to require new policies towards this part of the world. As a matter of fact, to all parts of the world, because it won't be confined just to the Middle East.
Senator Graham, how much has Egypt consumed the conference here in Munich? Have people talking about it?
A lot, and the truth is, if you had predicted on Christmas Day that by Valentine's Day that Mubarak, the ruler of Egypt for 30 years, had announced that he was going to leave, that the president of Tunisia, who had been ruling that country for 30 years, that the president of Yemen said he's not going to stand for election, all that would happen by February the 14th. People would think you're crazy. The fast-paced change in this world is being fueled by Facebook, social networking, but Egypt to me is an opportunity for really a new start in the Mideast between us and the Arab people, the Egyptian people. The army is the key here. So I've got one simple message. If the Egyptian army is watching Fox News, make sure you do not lose the reputation you worked hard to earn among your people. You're the people, you're the group within Egypt that can hold the country together to create order out of chaos. And as Senator McCain said today, as Americans, we need to relook and refocus how we do business in the Mideast. Sometimes you have to do business with people who have values you don't agree with, but we need to refocus and reshape our relationships with other regimes.
Yeah, it's really briefly. We're living through days of history here. And because nothing like this has ever happened in the Arab world before. I'm leaving out Iran because Iran is a Persian, not an Arab country. In the sense that in Tunisia and Egypt, we've now seen a popular uprising do what popular uprisings did post-Cold War in Ukraine and places like that. And my reaction is it's thrilling, but it's also unsettling. It's thrilling in the sense that the people of Egypt are out demanding their human rights. It's unsettling because we don't know where it's going to end. And I think we've just got to do everything we possibly can to make sure that it doesn't end with one small group, either in the government or in the protesters, controlling the next Egyptian government. The government of Egypt has to be selected by all the voters of Egypt in a free and fair election.
Let me emphasize one thing. Egypt is not just another Middle Eastern country. Right. Egypt is the heart and soul of the Arab world. 1 out of every 4 people who live in this region are Egyptians. Now, I don't have to review with you the history of this country and the cultural and historical importance. So what that had happened in Tunisia is certainly a shaking event, a startling event. But what's happening in Egypt is without precedent, and we have to adjust to it. And yes, we will take some of the blame for not having pushed harder for human rights and democratization and freedom and all those things. But we now are presented with a situation where we're going to have to act very quickly. And the longer these demonstrations last, the more likely it is that a radical element will hijack what is really a spontaneous movement.
You look at the pictures, and they're gripping. You watch the video on TV and you can't stop looking at it. But if you're sitting in, back home and you're trying to get food on the table and get your kids off to school or do their homework or whatever, why should people back home? I mean, other than sort of the higher moral issue like human rights, I mean, why should it really matter to them?
I think after 9/11, people get it. People understand back home what happens when we disengage. What happened in Afghanistan when the Russians left and the Taliban filled the vacuum? What would happen in Egypt if the Muslim Brotherhood took over? What would the world be like if Israel is now completely surrounded by enemies, not people who are willing to tolerate the state of Israel? I'm in a very red conservative state. But people in South Carolina understand that the world is connected, but it is incumbent upon us to let people back home know that Afghanistan has been 9 and 10 years in the making, that we've lost over 1,000 troops, and it cost us $100 billion a year. But the idea within 10 years of the Taliban being taken down, they could come back, and to think that wouldn't affect our future. So my plea to the people of South Carolina and the country is to understand that really we've just been getting it right for 1 year in Afghanistan. General Petraeus has the inputs with General McChrystal now to bring about success. We finally have enough troops. So it really does matter how it ends in Egypt.
The whole idea of the Taliban raised another issue. Prime Minister David Cameron of the UK today gave a speech that is causing some stir. He says, in part, he says, multiculturalism has failed, and condemns Britain's long-standing policy of multiculturalism and says it's a failure. He's calling for better integration of young Muslims to combat homegrown extremism. And in a speech today, he said it's time for a change of policy towards Britain's ethnic and religious minorities, saying hands-off tolerance of those who reject Western values, that has failed. And I guess that's the whole issue of political correctness.
Right.
Fort Hood, you know,
Yeah, I thought Prime Minister Cameron gave a great speech today. It was really straight talk. And Senator Susan Collins of Maine and I were very pleased, who's here, were pleased with the speech because it was similar to our report on Fort Hood, and it really brought it all home. There was there's still too much of a concern in our government about calling our enemy in the war on terrorism what it is. It's not a single group, it's an ideology, it's a corruption of a religion, it's violent Islamist extremism. And I thought Cameron was great in saying that. Political correctness has a cost. At Fort Hood, it cost the lives of 13 Americans. And I think he's right. What we've got to start getting back to is what we've been much better at in the U.S. than, frankly, people have been over here in Europe, and that is building a community. Yes, you're an ethnic American, but the noun is American. You're an American, and you're part of a broader community, a broader family, and you never turn against it and become a homegrown terrorist.
You know, that's a double-edged sword, too. There are certain human rights that we're going to pursue, and we're not going to spend our money in Afghanistan, Iraq, or any other place to have a rape trial disposed of in a tribal situation where you can get out of the rape charge if the father's willing to give a daughter. We're not going to be part of that, but we do have to understand that when we go into these countries, there's a tribal tradition that we're not trying to Americanize the world here. We're trying to create a stable Afghanistan where representative government would take hold, and they will have different values than we do. In the United States, you want to be an American, then become an American. But when we help people throughout the world, we have to understand that there are differences in culture, and the goal is not to turn every country into Jeffersonian democracy. The goal is to make sure it's stable, representative, rule of law based, with a cultural component to it, so that we'll create allies, not enemies, and we can be safer ourselves.
Yes, but we cannot, for the sake of political correctness, allow a situation to evolve where it endangers the lives of our fellow citizens. And it's a careful balance. And many of us would argue that we have erred on the side of being politically correct at risk of, quote, bad publicity. And I think Joe, as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, has seen that on several occasions, that the evidence was there, but we were very reluctant to pursue it much further because of fear of charges of being discriminatory in one way or another.
Yeah, I don't think we don't do any favor to Muslim Americans, thousands of whom serve honorably in our military, by refusing to call our enemy in the war against terrorism what it is. It's not Islam, it's violent Islamist extremism. It's a political ideology. And until we start saying that, this is the old maxim of war. The first thing you got to do is know your enemy. You got to be able to call it what it is, and then you can defeat it. And then we can work with Muslim Americans to stop the spread of homegrown terrorism, radicalization of Americans against our country. That's what's been happening too much in the last couple of years.
There's much more of an interview with the three senators. You'll see it later this week. And next up on the record, our own Bill O'Reilly is offering President Obama